Good afternoon, judges. I would first like to ask you to think back to when you were 8 years old, about who you wanted to be when you grew up. How did you want to change the world? My name is Valeria Fernandez, and my Capstone research has focused on the power of female mentorship when encouraging girls to pursue a life working in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, also known as the STEM fields. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, as of 2015, women, on average, represent 24% of the workforce in STEM fields in the United States. This unequal representation was a problem I considered for my capstone research. I wanted to know what the challenges were to nurturing girls to love math and science, and how that impacts the number of women in STEM fields, like computer programming. Throughout my research process, I learned that the power of girls in STEM, teaching girls in STEM, is fundamental to impacting the technology workforce in the United States. Learning about my problem through extensive background and field research helped inform my proposed solution. I believe schools must host programs for young girls so that they can connect with female mentors that are in STEM fields, so that from a very young age, girls can realize that math and science can be their calling. The statistics mentioned earlier about all STEM fields is indicative of all technology workforce in big corporations like Apple. Consider these numbers I found while conducting background research. Apple has a workforce where men comprise 70% of the technology jobs, where women comprise 30%. It is clear that men dominate. The lack of gender diversity is also replicated at the university level. In a field research interview with Malia Villallon, who is a graduating female engineer from San Jose State, says that she's either one of 4 girls or the only girls in her engineering department. One would then think that having a prestigious job in a place like Apple would mean wanting to keep that job. But what is it that causes the few women to enter these STEM jobs, leave those STEM jobs, and what prevents them from entering these STEM jobs in the first place? Kieran Snyder is currently a CEO at Texio. She interviewed approximately 700 women who used to work in STEM fields. Beyond the unequal pay that women get compared to men, she also found that there are two other reasons: the paternity leave policy and the daily discrimination they go through in their workforce. In Fortune magazine, J.P. Mangan-Linden writes that women get paid less for many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that when it comes to salary negotiation, women tend to ask less than men because they feel like their skills are not capable for more. Even though these women have probably gone through more obstacles to get to where they are now, they still don't get compensated as equally. Women who are currently in STEM fields have a communication-based job, which normalizes the stereotype that women are good at talking, but not so much at the technical stuff. Next, parental policies. Some technology companies have great parental policies, but many still have a long way to go. For example, Google alone has seen a 50% drop of women leaving their workforce after changing its policies back in 2007. A final factor that affects women from entering these fields is the subtle discrimination they go through in their workforce that stems from stereotypes. People use stereotypes to make decisions about their coworkers, which can be especially damaging for women because they are the minorities and men are the dominants. Men are dominant. Women are capable of holding engineering jobs, but because of cultural stereotypes, they feel as though they don't belong in these high-end paying jobs or technical jobs. When conducting a field research interview with Maria Guzman, who is a freshman in college majoring in computer science, says she once doubted herself because of the gender gap. Guzman mentioned that she was going to settle to be a hairstylist or a housewife. She also mentioned that she did not know about computer programming until she was a sophomore in high school. Guzman did not have the resources to learn about computer science at a much younger age because people never really mentioned to her that she might like a career in STEM. Maria was one of the lucky ones who had an experience outside of the classroom where she was a co-champion and where she could explore her love for programming. I can identify with Maria's sentiments, as I too was a co-champion last year. I can say what she said and take it a step further and say that teaching girls and being a peer teacher made me feel that my knowledge in STEM, specifically coding, was valuable. In thinking about my field research with Maria, Malia, and the trio of girls, I had to ask myself, how can women become a critical mass in STEM fields as to influence the culture and policies in these fields? My answer to my question start with an 8-year-old girl. From a very young age, boys are drawn into STEM-related fields and encouraged to encouraged to create and learn how things work simply because of the toys that are marketed to them, like Legos and Hot Wheel cars. Conversely, girls are targeted with toys that make them imagine about fantasy worlds, and where dressing a doll is perceived as fun, and where princesses are their heroes. This makes it so that girls who go against these stereotypes become socially unacceptable. My answer was inspired by a field research interview with Dr. John Barron. He gave me his insight on why he thinks there's a lot more men than women in these fields. Dr. Barron said that many of the men that work in these technology fields now were playing with computers when they were 8 years old. But that is because computers growing up for them were only advertised for boys, not for women, not for girls. I realized that 8 years old is the ideal age to really influence a child's belief on how they could change the world and what their profession could be when they grow up. My field research interview of 3 young girls at play was eye-opening and helping me realize that. The question was asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? The 6-year-old replied with a police officer. The 7-year-old replied with a firefighter, and the 8-year-old replied with, I don't know. The 6-year-old and the 7-year-old chose jobs that were meant to help and save people. The police officer and a firefighter are meant to be for more masculine people and are suited more for men. None of them mentioned a job that's more traditional for women, like nursing. For the 8-year-old that said, I don't know, her answer could be interpreted as she doesn't know what is out there yet and doesn't know what careers are out there yet for her. This field research taught me that girls this young is the ideal age to really influence them to love math and science, because they don't feel society's stereotypical limitations yet. If those same girls grow up to each encourage and mentor other young girls, then the impact could be exponential. Not only can this be beneficial for the young girls, but it can also be rewarding to the mentor. This could be a factor for them staying in these fields, knowing they're making a difference in a child's life. More women enter, more women stay, more women change the world. I encourage everyone in this room who has an impact in a young girl's life to be excited about their interests, because you can be a game changer too. Thank you.
So at this point we have about 20 minutes of Q&A at most, so if anyone, open it up to the panel.
You mentioned that gender bias in toys had a big impact on children at the age of 8, and I was wondering if there might be any other factors that could influence interest in STEM around the same time.
Kids very young don't really know much, and they take in whatever you give them. Parents could be a factor to the gender gap, because they could influence their beliefs, as in, like, they could have a dad who is very masculine and believes in that the dad should bring in the money and the woman should stay at home. Kids grow up to learning these things, and this could be a very big factor for why there's a lot more men.
Is there someone who played a role as a mentor for you in terms of your interest in STEM study?
Yes, a very big factor with mentor is Miss P. She is the one that, in Miss Paraíso, she introduced me to computer science. Before last year, I had no idea what computer science was. And I got into a Explore to Computer Science class with her, and she introduced me to it, and I really fell in love with it.
So I work as a software engineer, so this is awesome. It's like it's very close to home. And I think I think it's all great. I'm wondering if you know of any good organizations that connect like women that are already working as engineers with younger girls that are trying to get into the subject.
As of in my field research, I have not found any programs that can help young girls now. But I did find that where companies have already been creating programs and scholarships for young girls, but none of them have really like a mentor for them specifically.
What do you think? You've talked a lot about mentorships. Like, what do you think that looks like for an 8-year-old? Who's doing it? How does it work? Some ideas that you've had.
We can have female mentors come into classes from elementary schools, and they can have a one-on-one tutoring for them, and that could actually like help the kids feel more comfortable with the subject as well.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was wondering, personally, how do you think in the future you could act as a mentor for other girls here at Fremont or wherever you wind up in college?
Well, I want to become a computer programmer, and hopefully I can either work in a technology company or create my own company. And I want to go into helping girls who have no idea who it is, for middle school, high school, elementary schools, and I want to mentor girls.
Oh yeah. So you talked a little bit about gender bias and just stuff that happens when the ratio is so out of sync. And one of the things that I still struggle with is getting men to understand kind of the female experience in STEM. Do you think that there's anything that we could be doing for little boys, like to teach them a little bit more about?
Yes, I think so. We should. I feel like maybe if we can give female mentors to also mentor them too, and they can see that seeing a female in STEM could be normal, and when they grow up, they can see they can see that being a female in these fields is normal.
So you brought up the 8-year-old girls and your field research with them. I was wondering what you think influenced those girls' responses to saying, I want to be a police officer, I want to be, because they're clearly getting that from somewhere. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are around where you think they got that information.
The 6-year girl is being raised by three sisters, but one of them is going into construction. And I feel like that's a big factor in what is encouraging her to go into. Like, she doesn't see any stereotypes. The 7-year-old is being raised with a self-proclaimed tomboy, and she does not also see any stereotypes. Everything is normal for her. So I think that's a big factor of why they chose these fields.
Do you think there's anything specifically limiting them from potentially seeing STEM as a career for themselves?
I think also parents could be a big factor. Parents grow up a certain way, old-fashioned, and men, of course, like bring in the money, women stay at home, and I feel like parents also grow up with that mentality, and I think they pass it on to their children.
I was wondering if you ever saw any gender bias in the classroom, if you ever experienced or saw another student experience a teacher treating a female student in math or science differently than their male student classmate?
In my experience, I have not experienced any gender bias in classroom specifically. So, yeah.
What might you do if you did see something? You know, if you noticed that your male professor next year was not giving enough talking time to the female student in the classroom, what do you think could?
I feel like I would go and talk to him. Maybe that changed his perspective talk to him about being a woman and how we get treated really different, and maybe get him to ease up a little and to help women and help more women and not just the men.
So there's an argument that I hear a lot that goes something like, well, there's a big gender discrepancy in, say, marketing for way more women than men, so why is it a problem that there's such uneven numbers in engineering? Do you have an answer for why you think it should be more of an equal issue? In engineering?
In engineering? Well, I feel like technology is advancing really a lot, and I feel like men shouldn't be a part of our future. I think women should also be a part of our future. We should give the perspective of both men and women, not just the men. It's a really biased.
So let's say that you wanted to come up with a proposal for a nonprofit business that is going to bring a program like you're talking about to, say, Oakland schools. If you were to continue doing further research to support what your plans are, what other information, field research do you feel like you would need to do or gather in order to be able to support your plan?
I think I will have to put in the outcome, and I feel like the outcome is very important because it will make a really big impact if we have these mentors in classes, and I feel like how that affects the mentors and the women and the men, I feel like that should go into the report as well, and I feel like that could convince them.
How would you gather that data about there being an outcome?
I will do a research and maybe do not experiments, but experiments with young girls and get them to be mentored by these female mentors and see how they grow up and what perspective is. And also we could do that with the boys, and we could see if we can mentor them with these female mentors too, and we could see how the outcome and how they grow up and how that can really change their perspective and how their mind is different from the men that are currently in STEM.
I have one last one. For you said you want to go into computer science, and what are some things you're thinking about for yourself as you're going into this field where, the person you interviewed, you might be the only woman in your class? What are some things you're thinking to help yourself persevere through that?
I think talking to a lot of engineers who are currently in these STEM fields, and just to ask them how they made it, because I know that being the only girl in a class like this would be very different for them, but it also be very powerful for women. So I feel like talking to female engineers would really help me and motivate me to really continue in this path.
So at this point, would you say 6 minutes to score and give feedback? And then we can go ahead and come back together to calibrate just a little bit before you call them the next day. Yeah, right after. Are there any specific categories people wanted to talk about. We're going to try and just share out around 2 of them. So if you have specific ones, then I'm happy to just jump on those.
I always have a question around argument,
Arguments?
especially addresses alternative or opposing perspectives
That's
and
right.
what that means and how
that
what
would
you
look.
thought with this presentation.
So,
And just to add to that,
yeah.
how that plays a part into evidence as well.
Okay. So, in terms of the counter argument piece, one of the expectations is that in their research they find it's kind of what you were asking about, the opposing viewpoint, right? So, the opposing viewpoint could have been, had she said it, people argue that there's a big disparity in marketing too. So, like, why is it such a big deal? That would have been an opposing viewpoint had she offered that viewpoint. And then it would have been like, yes, but how do I take that perspective and offer more evidence from my own perspective to kind of push back against it? Now, that's just my take on it. That's how I've always scored it. So there could be a different perspective in this space that if you feel like you wanted to share. In terms of how I scored her for that, I did score her developing for the argument because of just the lack of addressing a true opposing viewpoint. So that's just kind of how I took it. But people, if you have any push, I'm happy to hear other perspectives.
I thought she was advanced on the clear and original thought.
Yeah.
And I felt like her reasoning was clear and convincing, but then I thought her partially addressing the opposing perspectives put her in developing. So I sort of averaged advanced and developing to get my score for her, for her argument.
Right. It's true. I guess it's a question of how much do we want to weigh that counter argument piece, because if we as a team kind of decide, well, as long as they have it, that could push them up, or do we want to consider everything and then kind of do what you did and like average it out? Is it a big deal to us that there is no opposing perspective presented? We can kind of just decide for ourselves how we feel about that. So if anyone has any other thoughts, because that makes sense too, right? Just thinking about, there are so many bullet points for each of these, right? Which ones does she have? Because I would agree with what you said about the line of reasoning and stuff. So, you know. So what was your score in the end, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, I gave her a 4 for clear and original argument and clear reasoning that was convincing, but I gave her a 2 for partially addressing alternatives, opposing alternatives and perspectives. So I averaged 4 and 2 and got 3.
Yeah, I had a 3 as well.
Okay.
Okay.
And so should we do that for the others too, if it feels like we're not scoring to the lowest bullet, but kind of finding the middle of all of them?
We can do that. I would feel comfortable pushing it up to a 2.5 to just kind of have us closer in terms of that range. But that's just, you know, there's going to be a little bit of disparity, so that's fine. But yeah. Were there any other questions around that? Or another line of the scoring sheet that you wanted to touch base on?
I mentioned on the evidence
Right.
because it's hard, you know, you want to be fair to the student, but it kind of plays itself out. So if you don't offer an opposing view,
Right.
what is the strength of your evidence that you're presenting for your argument?
Right.
So can you be a 4 if you're only a 3
Right.
in your argument? Can you be, I think that's the part where I wanted to kind of talk about it a little bit, because you don't want what essentially may have been just a one slide that says some people say, or there's evidence to show that it then plays out in 2 other categories where the person is being reduced in their score. Exactly.
Right.
So I just thought that was interesting and worth kind of a little bit discussing about the evidence, because what I did see was that in many of her slides she had cited her sources.
Right.
And I had 8 different sources that she used, which on average is extensive,
Right.
And many varied kinds of resources, which I thought was outstanding.
Right.
So without thinking about the opposing argument, and it not being present, and the evidence alone was really, really strong.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I found it hard to give her a 4 because there's no evidence to show the strength of that argument without
Right.
addressing the point of it, the point of the opposing view. But that was probably one of the things I was still kind of trying to wrestle with a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave her a 3.5.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
For the argument or the evidence?
For the evidence. For the argument, I gave her a 3.
Mm-hmm.
I give her a 4 for evidence. I'm okay with like keeping those
Separating.
separate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if you get scored down on one, then you got scored down there.
Yeah.
Maybe it shouldn't affect everything else.
Right. For me, when I look at evidence, it's as long as the evidence that she is presenting is actually supporting what she's talking about, then I'm willing to be like, okay, so you cited your sources, your evidence is supporting what your thesis is saying, like, great job, you found evidence that aligns with what your topic is, right? As long as I don't have any questions around, but like if I'm not left being like, I wish there was more about this particular thing that you were talking about, because I struggle with that too. Like you could have perfect evidence and cite it perfectly, but then I wonder, but what if like, there was space for a little bit more, context or a little bit more evidence for this specific topic. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that about her necessarily, but I do, that's the other side for me, right? I'm happy to be like, you have your evidence, it aligns, but then if there's a space where I feel like there is a gap, I might score someone down a little bit. So,
I gave her a 3 for the evidence because I thought there was a little bit of gap because she was referencing 8 as being the magic age, and she interviewed 3 children, and I just thought if part of her argument was about 8 being a critical age, then maybe that pool of people that she interviewed should have been a little larger, and maybe she could have incorporated boys and girls to see, what kinds of jobs do boys want, and at 8 or 6 or 5. So that I was wrestling with 3.5 or 3 for evidence, and I just thought that seemed like a very important piece to her whole presentation was the magic number.
That's what I was trying to push her to talk about when I asked her about next steps and what more she should gather. I was hoping she would hit that in her Q&A because I was trying to help her out a little bit.
Yeah.
But she didn't mention that. So, but I agree with you on that point. So I actually gave her a 2.5 because of that gap. Because it was her entire solution.
Yeah.
Like her entire solution was talking to 8-year-old girls about it. But there wasn't a ton of evidence for why it's 8 years old, except that, one dude happened to be like, when I was 8 is when I really started playing computer games.
Toys, the gender
Yeah.
bias in toys.
Yeah.
I think it was, and then, but she did address later on because we did ask her if there was any other influence, and she did offer parent influence and the culture at home as one of the other things. So I thought that was good. I was also hoping she might talk about the influence that teachers can have on their students. Especially
you had a
in
great question about that in the classroom too, right?
yeah.
How the dynamic with the teacher with the students play a part.
Any other thoughts or questions before we submit and pull in our next presenter? Cool. Can we just can we agree that she was a pretty strong presenter at least? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I just want to make sure no one's like she was too.
No, you were the top grader.
Yeah.
I tend to be, and it all averages out.
There you go.